We are Edward Snowden, Laura Poitras and Glenn Greenwald from the Oscar-winning documentary CITIZENFOUR. AUAA. Hello Reddit. Laura Poitras and Glenn Greenwald here together in Los Angeles, joined by Edward Snowden from Moscow. A little bit of context. Laura is a filmmaker and journalist and the director of CITIZENFOUR, which last night won the Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature. The film debuts on HBO tonight at 9 p.m. ET. PT Link is a journalist who co-founded The Intercept Link with Laura and fellow journalist Jeremy Scahill. Laura, Glenn, and Ed are also all on the board of directors at Freedom of the Press Foundation. Link will do our best to answer as many of your questions as possible, but appreciate your understanding as we may not get to everyone. Proof. Link I will be also answering from Link I'm out of time, everybody. Thank you so much for the interest, the support, and most of all, the great questions. I really enjoyed the opportunity to engage with Reddit again, it really has been too long. What's the best way to make NSA spying an issue in the 2016 presidential election? It seems like while it was a big deal in 2013, ISIS and other events have put it on the back burner for now in the media and general public. What are your ideas for how to bring it back to the forefront? This is a good question, and there are some good traditional answers here. Organizing is important. Activism is important. At the same time, we should remember that governments don't often reform themselves. One of the arguments in a book I read recently, Bruce Schneier, Data and Goliath, is that perfect enforcement of the law sounds like a good thing, but that may not always be the case. The end of crime sounds pretty compelling, right? So how can that be? Well, when we look back on history, the progress of Western civilization and human rights is actually founded on the violation of law. America was of course born out of a violent revolution that was an outrageous treason against the crown and established order of the day. History shows that the righting of historical wrongs is often born from acts of unrepentant criminality. Slavery. The protection of persecuted Jews. But even on less extremist topics, we can find similar examples. How about the prohibition of alcohol? Gay marriage? Marijuana? Where would we be today if the government, enjoying powers of perfect surveillance and enforcement, had entirely within the law rounded up, imprisoned, and shamed all of these lawbreakers? Ultimately, if people lose their willingness to recognize that there are times in our history when legality becomes distinct from morality, we aren't just ceding control of our rights to government, but our agency in determining our futures. How does this relate to politics? Well, I suspect that governments today are more concerned with the loss of their ability to control and regulate the behavior of their citizens than they are with their citizens' discontent. How do we make that work for us? We can devise means, through the application and sophistication of science, to remind governments that if they will not be responsible stewards of our rights, we the people will implement systems that provide for a means of not just enforcing our rights, but removing from governments the ability to interfere with those rights. You can see the beginnings of this dynamic today in the statements of government officials complaining about the adoption of encryption by major technology providers. The idea here isn't to fling ourselves into anarchy and do away with government, but to remind the government that there must always be a balance of power between the governing and the governed, and that as the progress of science increasingly empowers communities and individuals, there will be more and more areas of our lives where if government insists on behaving poorly and with a callous disregard for the citizen we can find ways to reduce or remove their powers on a new and permanent basis. Our rights are not granted by governments. They are inherent to our nature. But it's entirely the opposite for governments. Their privileges are precisely equal to only those which we suffer them to enjoy. We haven't had to think about that much in the last few decades because quality of life has been increasing across almost all measures in a significant way, and that has led to a comfortable complacency. But here and there throughout history, we'll occasionally come across these periods where governments think more about what they can do rather than what they should do, and what is lawful will become increasingly distinct from what is moral. In such times, we'd do well to remember that at the end of the day, the law doesn't defend us, we defend the law. And when it becomes contrary to our morals, we have both the right and the responsibility to rebalance it toward just ends. Edward Snowden just called for civil disobedience against the U.S. government whilst also arguing for the legalization of marijuana during an AMA. This is quite possibly the most Reddit thing ever. It's happening. GIF Snowden 2016. While your comment is certainly aired in jest, I honestly believe we are in the midst of history in the making. While trying to avoid buying into hype and grandeur, let me elaborate a moment. We've all read some writings from Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton. This guy is a true hero, Ben Franklin, Thomas Paine, John Adams, no less a hero, ironically hated Hamilton, etc. on these very topics. Similar was their plight and equal was their discontent, though it would inevitably grow much stronger nearer the revolution itself. Their established, respected government encroached upon their fundamental rights. It was nothing new then, it's nothing new now. Reading these responses from all three ops, I am unable to separate them from those letters and well-known quotables from patriots long gone. Granted, no one is asking for revolution, at least, no one of any sense. But the fact remains that one day these silly little AMAs from a silly website may find their way into the textbooks, text tablets of our grandchildren. Will they speak of an evil, failed coup to cripple the governments? No doubt by then the word will carry a capital G while the word God will not, enforcement of the law? Or will they be the words of activists who fought for human rights against an overreaching body? For all of our sakes, for our children's sakes, I sincerely hope it is the latter. May changes to policy, and more importantly, the world's attitude towards these issues, come swiftly and peacefully. Edit. Some are reluctant to compare Snowden to the likes of Jefferson and Franklin. Please do not misunderstand. I know it's a big jump, but I don't see it as immediately inappropriate. Americans hold certain historical figures up high as a manner of culture. They deserve our respect and gratitude, but in truth they were humans who spoke up in their times. They were farmers, businessmen, lawyers. Both sets, activists then and now, committed treason in the name of human rights, and that is to be respected. Now, we do not need a new bill with his face on it or anything. My position is simply that these events and issues will undoubtedly be marked in history, and that Snowden has had no small part in it. Ooh, my first gold, and it's not a Futurama reference. Thanks, Mom. Martin Luther King said it best in his letter from Birmingham County Jail. How can you advocate breaking some laws and obeying others? The answer lies in the fact that there are two types of laws, just and unjust. I would be the first to advocate obeying just laws. One has not only a legal but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. I would agree with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all. Ultimately, if people lose their willingness to recognize that there are times in our history when legality becomes distinct from morality, we aren't just ceding control of our rights to government, but our futures. Wow. The key tactic DC uses to make uncomfortable issues disappear is bipartisan consensus. When the leadership of both parties join together as they so often do, despite the myths to the contrary, those issues disappear from mainstream public debate. The most interesting political fact about the NSA controversy, to me, was how the divisions didn't break down at all on partisan lines. Huge amount of the support for our reporting came from the left, but a huge amount came from the right. When the first bill to ban the NSA domestic metadata program was introduced, it was tellingly sponsored by one of the most conservative Tea Party members, Justin Amash, and one of the most liberal, John Conyers. The problem is that the leadership of both parties, as usual, are in full agreement. They love NSA mass surveillance. So that has blocked it from receiving more debate. That NSA program was ultimately saved by the unholy trinity of Obama, Nancy Pelosi and John Boehner, who worked together to defeat the Amash-Conyers bill. The division over this issue, like so many other big ones, such as crony capitalism that owns the country, is much more insider versus outsider than Dem v. GOP. But until there are leaders of one of the two parties willing to dissent on this issue, it will be hard to make it a big political issue. That's why the Dem efforts to hand Hillary Clinton the nomination without contest are so depressing. She's the ultimate guardian of bipartisan status quo corruption, and no debate will happen if she's the nominee against some standard Romney, Bush-type GOP candidate. Some genuine dissenting force is crucial. Slitte. I would have come forward sooner. I talked to Daniel Ellsberg about this at length, who has explained why more eloquently than I can. Had I come forward a little sooner, these programs would have been a little less entrenched, and those abusing them would have felt a little less familiar with and accustomed to the exercise of those powers. This is something we see in almost every sector of government, not just in the national security space, but it's very important. Once you grant the government some new power or authority, it becomes exponentially more difficult to roll it back. Regardless of how little value a program or power has been shown to have, such as the Section 215 dragnet interception of call records in the United States, which the government's own investigation found never stopped a single imminent terrorist attack despite a decade of operation. Once it's a sunk cost, once dollars and reputations have been invested in it, it's hard to peel that back. Don't let it happen in your country. Don't let it happen in your country. God damn it, Canadian. Mr. Snowden, do you feel that your worst fear is being realized, that most people don't care about their privacy? To answer the question, I don't. Poll after poll is confirming that, contrary to what we tend to think, people not only care, they care a lot. The problem is we feel disempowered. We feel like we can't do anything about it, so we may as well not try. It's going to be a long process, but that's starting to change. The technical community, and a special shout-out to every underpaid and overworked student out there working on this. You are the noble atlas lifting up the globe in our wildly inequitable current system, is in a lot of way left holding the bag on this one by virtue of the nature of the problems, but that's not all bad. 2013, for a lot of engineers and researchers, was a kind of atomic moment for computer science. Much like physics' post-Manhattan Project, an entire field of research that was broadly apolitical realized that work intended to improve the human condition could also be subverted to degrade it. Politicians and the powerful have indeed got a hell of a head start on us, but equality of awareness is a powerful equalizer. In almost every jurisdiction you see officials scrambling to grab for new surveillance powers now, not because they think they're necessary. Even government reports say mass surveillance doesn't work, but because they think it's their last chance. Maybe I'm an idealist, but I think they're right. In 20 years' time, the paradigm of digital communications will have changed entirely, and so too with the norms of mass surveillance. Hey guys, sorry the Reddit mods are being a little weird. My account is, suddenly Snowden. Mods. Can you pull back the ban? I can't post from the primary account. Thanks. Mod here, really sorry for the confusion. Your colleague set up the ops account for you, and when you started replying on a different account we had to assume it was a fake. Your new account, suddenly Snowden, is good to go. Thanks. Feel free to prune this part of the thread. To Glenn, whatever happened to the list of U.S. citizens that the NSA spied on? You announced plans to release it. Then nothing. Can you tell us where that list went and why it was never published? Source. Link spelling double edit. Gold? Thank you, kind stranger. They're trying to release it, but 7 billion names takes a while to upload. NSA. Who have you spied on? Yes. Function has NSA wiretap, citizen. Return true. Alternatively, if the NSA had written the function has NSA wiretap, citizen. Log IP address, citizen. Infiltrate machine, citizen. Monitor browsing history, citizen. Fuck, citizen. Return false. Just make sure it's private or protected. No one likes getting fucked in public. I'm out of time, everybody. Thank you so much for the interest, the support, and most of all, the great questions. I really enjoyed the opportunity to engage with Reddit again. It really has been too long. Slite. I did a TED Talk specifically to refute that inane argument. Link. Can you explain what your life in Moscow is like? Moscow is the biggest city in Europe. A lot of people forget that. Shy of Tokyo, it's the biggest city I've ever lived in. I'd rather be home, but it's a lot like any other major city. Is winter harsh? Do you ever want to go out, but wake up and find yourself suddenly snowed in? Canada, Sweden and North Dakota have pretty harsh winters, too. As does Boston. This kills the joke. Damn, Edward Snowden is cooler than I thought. Edit. Did anyone notice what he titled his proof pic on Imgur? Dear all. How can we make sure that people still want to leak important information when everyone who does so puts the rest of their lives at stake? Whistleblower protection laws. A strong defense of the right for someone charged with political crimes to make any defense they want. Currently in the U.S., someone charged with revealing classified information is entirely prohibited from arguing before the jury that the programs were unlawful, immoral, or otherwise wrongful, and support for the development of technically and legally protected means of communications between sources and journalists. The sad truth is that societies that demand whistleblowers be martyrs often find themselves without either, and always when it matters the most. For Edward Snowden, Russian journalist Andrei Soldatov has described your daily life as circumscribed by Russian state security services, which he said control the circumstances of your life there. Is this accurate? What are your interactions with Russian state security like? With Russian government representatives generally? Good question, thanks for asking. The answer is of course not. You'll notice in all of these articles, the assertions ultimately come down to speculation and suspicion. None of them claim to have any actual proof, they're just so damn sure I'm a Russian spy that it must be true. And I get that. I really do. I mean, come on, I used to teach cyber counterintelligence, their term, at DIA. But when you look at an aggregate, what sense does that make? If I were a Russian spy, why go to Hong Kong? It would have been an unacceptable risk. And further, why give any information to journalists at all, for that matter, much less so much and of such importance? Any intelligence value it would have to the Russians would be immediately compromised. If I were a spy for the Russians, why the hell was I trapped in any airport for a month? I would have gotten a parade and a medal instead. The reality is I spent so long in that damn airport because I wouldn't play ball and nobody knew what to do with me. I refused to cooperate with Russian intelligence in any way. See my testimony to EU Parliament on this one if you're interested, and that hasn't changed. At this point, I think the reason I get away with it is because of my public profile. What can they really do to me? If I show up with broken fingers, everybody will know what happened. It is very realistic that in the realpolitik of great powers, this kind of thing could happen. I don't like to think that it would happen, but it certainly could. At the same time, I'm so incredibly blessed to have had an opportunity to give so much back to the people and internet that I love. I acted in accordance with my conscience and in so doing have enjoyed far more luck than any one person can ask for. If that luck should run out sooner rather than later, on balance I will still and always be satisfied. If it does happen, and you're forced into the US government's hands, know that I, and millions of other Americans, are behind you. Slite. Wow, the questions really blew up on this one. Let me start digging in. To be honest, I laughed at NPH. I don't think it was meant as a political statement, but even if it was, that's not so bad. My perspective is if you're not willing to be called a few names to help out your country, you don't care enough. If this be treason, then let us make the most of it. Note. Reddit is rate limiting my replies to 1 per 10 minutes. You are doing that too much. Try again in 9 minutes, guys. Sorry for the slow responses. Note. Reddit is rate limiting my replies to 1 per 10 minutes. You are doing that too much. Try again in 9 minutes, guys. Sorry for the slow responses. I know how to fix this. Find a picture of a bunch of snow completely covering a house, post picture to r. Funny, make the caption. Guess I'm not the only one who's snowed in. Question mark, question mark, question mark. Post as much as you want. Here's a little insight into how digital age media works. I learned of NPH's joke after I left the stage. He said it as we were walking off. I was going to tweet something about it and decided it was too petty and inconsequential even to tweet about just some lame wordplay Oscar joke from a guy who had just been running around on stage in his underwear moments before. So I forgot about it. My reaction was similar to Ed's, though I did think the joke was lame. A couple hours later at a post-Oscar event, a BuzzFeed reporter saw me and asked me a bunch of questions about the film and the NSA reporting, one of which was about that treason joke. I laughed, said it was just a petty pun and I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, but then said I thought it was stupid and irresponsible to stand in front of a billion people and accuse someone of treason who hasn't even been charged with it, let alone convicted of it. Knowing that would be the click-worthy comment, BuzzFeed highlighted that in a headline, making it seem like I had been on the warpath, enraged about this, convening a press conference to denounce this outrage. In fact, I was laughing about it the whole time when I said it, as the reporter noted. But all that gets washed away, and now I'm going to hear comments all day about how I'm a humorless scold who can't take a good joke. who gets furious about everything, etc. etc. Nobody did anything wrong here, including BuzzFeed. But it's just a small anecdote illustrating how the imperatives of Internet-age media and need for click headlines can distort pretty much everything they touch. Nobody did anything wrong here, including BuzzFeed. That's the political correct response. I'll just say it. Clickbait journalism is a cancer and it must be killed. President Obama, do you have anything you want to ask? Very exciting to see you here, Mr. Snowden. We've now known about the scary stuff happening at the NSA for quite some time. And yet from what I've seen, there's been no real effort to stop it. What are your thoughts on what we, as regular citizens, can do now? One of the biggest problems in governance today is the difficulty faced by citizens looking to hold officials to account when they cross the line. We can develop new tools and traditions to protect our rights, and we can do our best to elect new and better representatives, but if we cannot enforce consequences on powerful officials for abusive behavior, we end up in a system where the incentives reward bad behavior post-election. That's how we end up with candidates who say one thing but, once in power, do something radically different. How do you fix that? Good question. Yeah, but it makes for a good Netflix show. Check out Prism Break. Basically has free and open source alternatives to the NSA compromised software most of us use on a daily basis. Also support the they're fighting for the same cause Snowden is. Edit. Thank you so much for the Reddit gold, anonymous Redditor. Laura, are you still detained for extra screening when you fly in the US? The detentions have thankfully stopped, at least for now. Starting in 2006, after I came back from making a film about Iraq's first election, I was stopped and detained at the US border over 40 times, oftentimes for hours. After I went public with my experiences, Glenn broke the story in 2012, the harassment stopped. Unfortunately, there are countless others who aren't so lucky. To Greenwald Poitras, what was the most alarming revelations you discovered throughout this process, and is there more to come? To Snowden, what validation do we have that Putin is being honest about not spying in Russia? For me personally, the most shocking revelation was the overall one that the explicit goal of the NSA and its allies is captured by the slogan collected all, meaning they want to convert the Internet into a place of limitless, mass surveillance. Which is another way of saying they literally want to eliminate privacy in the digital link. Is definitely more significant reporting to come. Our colleagues at The Intercept Jeremy Scahill and Josh Begley just last week reported one of the most significant stories yet on the NSA and GCHQ's hacking link. To tag on to the Putin question, there's not, and that's part of the problem worldwide. We can't just reform the laws in one country, wipe our hands, and call it a day. We have to ensure that our rights aren't just being protected by letters on a sheet of paper somewhere, or those protections will evaporate the minute our communications get routed across a border. The only way to ensure the human rights of citizens around the world are being respected in the digital realm is to enforce them through systems and standards rather than policies and procedures. Slite. Wait. If I gift Snowden gold I don't have to see my family? As if he hadn't done enough for us already. Edit. Somebody's still spending the holidays with their family. Thank you for your sacrifice, too. Slite. Thanks for the kind words. I definitely consider myself a journalist, as well as an artist and a filmmaker. In my mind, it's not a question about whether I am one or the other. Documentary films needs to do more than journalism, they need to communicate something that is more universal. Slite. I think much has changed. The U.S. government hasn't restricted its own power, but it's unrealistic to expect them to do so. There are now court cases possible challenging the legality of this surveillance. One federal court in the U.S. and a British court just recently found this spying illegal. Social media companies like Facebook and Apple are being forced by their users to install encryption and other technological means to prevent surveillance, which is a significant barrier. Nations around the world, such as Brazil and Germany, are working together in unison to prevent U.S. hegemony over the Internet and to protect the privacy of their own citizens. And, most of all, because people now realize the extent to which their privacy is being compromised, they can and increasingly are using encryption and anonymizers to protect their own privacy and physically prevent mass surveillance. See here. link of these changes are very significant. And that's to say nothing of the change in consciousness around the world about how hundreds of millions of people think about these issues. The story has been, and continues to be, huge in many countries outside the US. To dogpile onto this, many of the changes that are happening are invisible because they're happening at the engineering level. Google encrypted the backhaul communications between their data centers to prevent passive monitoring. Apple was the first forward with an FDE by default smartphone, kudos. Grad students around the world are trying to come up with ways to solve the metadata problem. The opportunity to monitor everyone's associations, who you talk to, who you sleep with, who you vote for, even in encrypted communications. The biggest change has been in awareness. Before 2013, if you said the NSA was making records of everybody's phone calls and the GCHQ was monitoring lawyers and journalists, people raised eyebrows and called you a conspiracy theorist. Those days are over. Facts allow us to stop speculating and start building, and that's the foundation we need to fix the Internet. We just happen to be the generation stuck with fighting these fires. Edward, a friend of mine, works for the NSA. He still actively denies that anything you have done or said is legitimate, completely looking past any documented proof that you uncovered and released. Is this because at lower levels of the agency, they don't see what's going on in the intelligence gathering section? Or do you suspect he simply refuses to see any wrongdoing by his employer? So when you work at NSA, you get sent what are called agency all emails. They're what they sound like. Messages that go to everybody in the workforce. In addition to normal bureaucratic communications, they're used frequently for opinion shaping internally, and are often classified at least in part. They assert, frequently without evidence, what is true or false about cases and controversies in the public news that might influence the thinking about the intelligence community workforce, while at the same time reminding them how totally screwed they'll be if they talk to a journalist, while helpfully reminding them to refer people to the Public Affairs Office. Think about what it does to a person to come into their special top secret office every day and get a special secret email from the director of NSA, actually drafted by totally different people, of course, because senior officials don't have time to write PR emails, explaining to you why everything you heard in the news is wrong, and how only the brave, patriotic, and hardworking team of cleared professionals in the IC know the truth. Think about how badly you want to believe that. Everybody wants to be valued and special, and nobody wants to think they've perhaps contributed to a huge mistake. It's not evil, it's human. Tell your friend I was just like they are. But there's a reason the government has now almost 2 years out never shown me to have told a lie. I don't ask anybody to believe me. I don't want anybody to believe me. I want you to look around and decide for yourself what you believe, independent of what people says, independent of what's on TV, and independent of what your classified emails might claim. I saw that you used GPG to encrypt the document archives, and the movie stated that Laura and Glenn are using Tails to analyze documents. How do you collaborate? E.g., share a document, tag it together, share notes, etc.? Using tools like the Overview Project, a Knight Foundation, seems impossible when wanting to protect documents properly. P.S. Congrats and thank you for your amazing work. It would have been impossible for us to work on the NSA stories and make Citizen4 without many encryption tools that allowed us to communicate more securely. In fact, in the credits we thank several free software projects for making it all possible. I can't really get into our specific security process, but on The Intercept security experts, Mike Ali, wrote a great post about helping Glenn and I when we first got in contact with Snowden. Link definitely important that we support these tools so the creators can make them easier to use. They are incredibly underfunded for how important they are. You can donate to Tails, Tor and a few other projects here. Link. Slite. Do you mind people pirating Citizen4? I don't have a commercial interest in the film, so I can't speak for the filmmakers, but I know what it's like to be a student with no money. The movie is currently available for free as the movie is used as a public evidence in a lawsuit. Link. Hey everyone, thanks for the questions, I really enjoyed it. Sorry, but I have to run. Hope to be back soon. Ed, is there any truth to the report that Anna Chapman attempted to seduce you? Lol no. Lol no. Edward Snowden. Lorem ipsum dolor sit amet, consectischer adi pisking elit. Est du eiusmud temper incidedunt ut labor et dolor magna aliqua. Ut enim ad minum veniam, quis nostrud exercitation ulamco laboris nisi ut aliquip ex ea commodo consequat. Duis ot error dolor in reprehenderit in voluptat velit esse silum dolor eu fugiat nulla periator. Exceptor sint oxicat cupidatat non proident, sunt in culpa qui officia deserunt malit annum id est laborum. I think the correct term is honey pot edit. Fuck you, you. Suddenly Snowden for hijacking my post. Honeydicking. BRB becoming a whistleblower. First, congrats to the Oscar. Mr. Snowden, what do you think about the latest news Kaspersky broke? I understand they don't talk about victims and aggressors because it's their business model. But do you think they should name the NSA as an aggressor when they know about? Edit. Spelling. The Kaspersky report on the Equation Group. They appear to have stopped short of naming them specifically as NSA, although authorship is clear, was significant. But I think more significant is the recent report on the joint UK hacking of Gemalto, a Dutch company that produces critical infrastructure used around the world, including here at home. Why? Well, although firmware exploitation is nasty, it's at least theoretically reparable. Tools could plausibly be created to detect the bad firmware hashes and re-flash good ones. This isn't the same for SIMs, which are flashed at the factory and never touched again. When the NSA and GCHQ compromised the security of potentially billions of phones, 3G, 4G encryption relies on the shared secret resident on the SIM. They not only screwed the manufacturer, they screwed all of us, because the only way to address the security compromise is to recall and replace every SIM sold by Gemalto. Our governments, particular the security branches, should never be weighing the equities in an intelligence-gathering operation such that a temporary benefit to surveillance regarding a few key targets is seen as more desirable than protecting the communications of a global system. And this goes double when we are more reliant on communications and technology for our economy productivity than our adversaries. Slite. You should ask the US government. Why are you putting whistleblowers in prison at record rates? Why did you revoke his passport when he was trying to transit through Russia, thus forcing him to stay there? Why do you put whistleblowers in the position of having to choose between asylum in another country or decades in prison? In the past week, it's actually been warmer than the East Coast. Wasn't expecting that one. Not living in an American prison. Would be my guess. Hello Fantastic Trio. Any hope that Citizenfour's success will help with repatriating its star? Or will the Manning treatment forever hang over your head? Edward Snowden should not be forced to choose between living in Russia or spending decades in a cage inside a high-security American prison. DC officials and journalists are being extremely deceitful when they say, if he thinks he did the right thing, he should come back and face trial and argue that under the Espionage Act, Snowden would be barred even from raising a defense of justification. The courts would not allow it. So he'd be barred from raising the defense they keep saying he should come back and raise. The goal of the US government is to threaten, bully and intimidate all whistleblowers, which is what explains the mistreatment and oppression of the heroic Chelsea Manning, because they think that climate of fear is crucial to deterring future whistleblowers. As long as they embrace that tactic, it's hard to envision them letting Ed return to his country. But we as citizens should be much more interested in the question of why our government threatens and imprisons whistleblowers. Slite. I've spoken some about this. We had a great relationship with the CBC for months and did some big impact stories on Link Reporter with whom we were working left, Greg Weston. He was great, and the new one who was assigned wasn't comfortable with the documents, it seemed to us. But then CBC editors assured us they were committed to doing the reporting aggressively, assigned someone new, and the last story CBC did with us on mass CSEC spying on file uploads was, I think, superbly Link.